All right. Welcome, everybody, to this online event with Neighbors on Call. I'm Becca Zirkin. I'm one of the directors, and Susan Blunt is our other director. She's here too. And we are so grateful that you are all here. We also want to thank Ricky Hurtado, who is the candidate for North Carolina House District 63 in Alamance County, and State Representative Marcia Morey from Durham for taking time to be with us tonight. Is Marcia on? I'm not sure if Representative Morey is here yet, but I'm sure she will be any minute. We are so excited to be in the Zoom with all of you. So before we get started, we just want to make sure that everybody's got the Zoom basics down. So at the bottom of your screen, you've got some control buttons. On the left is the stop video button. And if you haven't already, please click that now to turn off your video, because that just improves the video quality for the session for everyone. And then you'll see the chat button in the middle down there. And you can use that to put your questions there after our speakers talk with us. And last, in the top right corner, there's a toggle switch for speaker view and gallery view. And we suggest that you use the speaker view during the presentation. So if you're just getting to know Neighbors on Call, thank you so much for coming and welcome. We are affectionately called NOC, and we're an all-volunteer grassroots group. Our goal is to flip at least one chamber of the North Carolina General Assembly this year, which means helping to flip 6 House seats or 5 Senate seats, or ideally both. There are activists all across North Carolina focused on this, and we have a very important role to play in it. It's especially important now because next year our General Assembly will approve new maps for the State Senate, State House, and for our delegation to US Congress. So having fair maps is the key to getting our democracy back on track. And saving democracy means reaching out to other voters like us. In 2018, we helped break the supermajority in the General Assembly by knocking over 15,000 doors. For the 2020 elections, because of COVID-19, we are phone banking, which is the next best thing to knocking doors. We're working with 4 North Carolina House campaigns, 2 that we need to flip, Ricky Hurtado's district in Alamance and Nicole Quick's district in Guilford, and 2 in Wake County that we need to hold for Representatives Sidney Batch and Terrence Everett. Campaigning for these state legislative races is going to help us turn North Carolina blue all the way up to the top of the ticket. So far, our fabulous team has completed more than 500 phone bank shifts since late March. And we were just talking about this at the beginning in the chit chat time, but in a phone bank for Ricky on Monday, there was a big team, many from NOC, not all from NOC, and they recruited 30 new volunteers just in that one phone bank. And they found 48 voters who agreed to vote tripling, which we were talking about before, and you can ask Ricky about that later to find out what that means. Susan, pass it over to you.
All right, well, I would like to introduce our guest tonight, but I'm not sure we have one of them. Is Marcia Morey here? I'll go ahead and talk to you.
She is, she's here.
Oh, good, okay, good. That's a relief. Thank you. Okay, now we want to welcome our 2 guests tonight. Knowing them has inspired us to imagine how Democratic leadership in the NCGA could transform our state, which gets us fired up to help Ricky win his race. First, in the program tonight, Representative Morey is going to give us an update from the General Assembly, and then she'll help us learn a little more about Ricky. And finally, they'll both take your questions at the end. Ricky Hurtado and he's on this call tonight. If you haven't seen him yet, you will in a minute. Ricky Hurtado is a candidate for House District 63 in Alamance. Ricky is the son of working class immigrants from El Salvador. He grew up in rural North Carolina, graduated from UNC as a Moorhead Kane Scholar, and earned a master's degree in public affairs at Princeton University. He's now on the faculty at UNC Chapel Hill. In the 2018 election, Erica McAdoo almost flipped this district, but came up 298 votes short. The district has since been redrawn. thanks to ungerrymandering, with some Democratic-leaning precincts added, and is considered the most flippable district in the state. That's pretty exciting. Marcia Morey represents House District 30 in Durham. She's a retired Chief District Court Judge and a strong progressive advocate. We are grateful that she has spoken to NOC on several occasions before. Welcome to you both. Representative Morey, we hand it off to you. Are you there? Are you unmuted? Sanji, can you unmute Representative Morey?
I think you're unmuted now.
There you go.
Okay, I'm used to being muted at the General Assembly, so I feel right at home. Hi, everyone. Why do so many people not have their videos on? I want to see shining faces, but Becca and Susan, thank you for having us. Oh, we're coming to life. I like this.
We asked them to turn it off to help with the network traffic, but I think maybe we should all just turn them on for 1 second so we can all wave and show Representative Morey how glad we are. She's
the shining faces. That's great.
Hi.
Thanks. Stay on video. I want to see what everyone's wearing below the waist. Stand up. Okay. Anyway, it's great to be here. You all are just a fabulous group. And I'm always excited to be with you, and thank you. Susan, Becca, everything you do, and all the volunteers. We couldn't do it without you. And it's a crazy time. How to campaign. I hope Ricky and I will talk about that. Ricky and I were supposed to have met several times, and then COVID and the fundraisers got delayed and canceled. So Ricky, it's fabulous to be here with you. Look forward to talking to you. So they asked me just to give kind of a brief overview of what went on this short session. It was, as you know, very different. We started in May, and the first issue became political. Did we have to be there in person? Who would wear masks? Who wouldn't wear masks? Could we do remote hearings? Could we do remote voting? We did a bit of hybrid about everything until the very end when it was mandatory. You had to be there for governor veto overrides, and you had to be there in committee in person. Still with the mask issue. If you looked on the other side of the aisle, I would say maybe a fifth of the members were wearing masks. On the Democratic side of the aisle, we were all wearing masks the entire time. So to see that become kind of the political sub-issue of all the work we were doing was disappointing. But for those of you that don't know me, I went to the General Assembly in the middle of my 5th term, and it was because I wanted to speak out. I was tired of the policies of North Carolina. As a judge, you cannot be political, you cannot speak out on issues, and raise the age to get kids out of the adult criminal system was coming up. And so I thought it was a perfect time to take the jump, to sign on for a $13,000 a year salary. I just couldn't refuse. I saved a lot on taxes. I couldn't wear a black robe anymore. I had to get some clothes. So that's why I went. But and we'll talk to Ricky about it. But this session, it was a very short session. We did a lot of the COVID money after the federal money came in. We have not spent nearly as much as that was allocated to North Carolina. We haven't touched a dime out of our rainy day fund yet, or we had another $1 billion unappropriated because, as you all know, we didn't do a budget last year. So we're still doing a continuation. So those were the issues that came up. We had 4 COVID subcommittees that worked on education and health and human services, and transportation and government continuing operations. We did that remotely. When we went into session, the very first bill that was filed, you'll all be proud to hear, was Medicaid expansion. We renamed it. It was the first thing we filed. The Democrats filed it. And to no one's surprise, it was never heard, never put in committee, and especially during this emergency time. That is our #1, stays our #1 top priority. We did an important bill on the election in November. I was the primary sponsor on House Bill 1184, and it was what I feel is necessary to have safe, secure elections in November. And it was to increase absentee ballot, prepaid postage, don't require any certification, online registration. Every voter should get an absentee ballot form request. So that was in our bill that we filed. The other bill that was what they called the bipartisan election law. It got the federal money down. We have a 20% match on it. But the poison pill they put in it was a photo ID. And in this bill, it says voters who get public assistance will be able to use their photo ID to be able to vote. Well, if any of you are close to my age, check your Medicare card. There's no photo on it. If you have Medicaid, there's no photo on it. If you get SNAP food stamps, it's a fallacy. But they're trying to enter into what the courts are doing about getting photo ID back for November. There's a moratorium on it now. The courts have not heard the issue. I'm pretty confident we won't have photo ID requirement in November, but it's up to whatever the state or federal courts will decide. But this election bill that they did pass, 1169, the good news is we got the money. The bad news is there's still requirement for absentee ballots to have someone verify you are who's signing the ballot, and also this poison pill of the photo ID. One good thing, we passed the Second Chance Act, which I primary sponsored in the House. It's to really help a lot of people get expunctions in the criminal justice system, to help keep their records, get their records clean, especially with minor offenses. So I think that was the one shining bright light of the session. And then, as you know, the governor had several vetoes of many of the bills to reopen North Carolina, the restaurants, the spas, the bowling alleys. He vetoed those bills. And I am proud to say, because we broke the supermajority, we have sustained every one of the governor's vetoes. And we got to keep that going. But more than that, we have to take the majority. What we did not do, I think, is just as important, especially as Ricky is getting, the momentum behind this. We did not do the Medicaid expansion. We did not touch on expanding unemployment benefits. We are one of the worst states in this country. 12 weeks of unemployment benefits at the lowest rate in the nation. We should have done more there. We still need to do more there, especially as the federal money runs out the end of July. We didn't get teachers and educators and staff the pay raise they deserved. It was an embarrassment of what they proposed, and we did not pass that bill. And we still have money to spend. I guess the last thing I would say, that during the session, as you know, what happened with George Floyd, and it turned everyone's attention into racial inequity in our criminal justice system. And Governor Hunt announced a task force. I'm very honored to be one of the 25 members on it, to look at what we are doing in our justice system. Who are we putting in jail? What are the fines and fees that are disproportionate to someone's income? The mass incarceration, the policing. What do we need to do to make sure there is never a George Floyd moment again, as well as many others? So that just started last week. Anita Earls, our fabulous Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, is on it, and Josh Stein, our Attorney General, is the co-chair. I'll talk to you more about it later if you'd like to know, but I'm thrilled to be here. And like you, I only want to hear from Ricky. Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much for that big update. And thank you all so much, Neighbors on Call, for being on this Zoom event tonight, the Zoom where it happens, right? I heard you're the creative director here, Susan, so that was a nice little name there. For those that I haven't met yet, I am Ricky Hurtado, and I'm the candidate running for House District 63 over next door from the Triangle in Alamance County. Many of you have heard a bit of my story, and I won't belabor it, but I certainly want to share some of my motivations why I decided to jump in this thing. I think part of it, like Marcia said, right, is the lucrative $13,000 salary to really be able to kick my feet up after this. But I think the real reason is really around my upbringing here in North Carolina. I'm the son of immigrants, parents who fled El Salvador in 1980 to escape a civil war. And it seems like 5-10 years that passed by, that story will never get old to me. It resonates in different ways because I learned so much about the time period that we're living in, both in Central America at the time and in the United States, what it meant for my parents to just pick up everything and flee their home. Nobody leaves home, right? Unless you're forced to sort of change your circumstances dramatically given what was happening in the country. And then everything they did to sort of integrate into a new society, right? I mean, in many ways, it is their unique story, but the story's not unique, right? It's sort of the story of this country and story of so many immigrant families who have sought to come to this country for freedom and opportunity. And so that's given me sort of a different lens in growing up in small town North Carolina in a time where we saw huge demographic shifts in across North Carolina. I grew up just south of Alamance County and Lee County in Sanford. And so at the time of us moving to Lee County, we moved from Los Angeles, California. I was born there and I lived the first about 6 years of my life there, and then moved to Sanford, North Carolina with my family. And it was at a time in the mid-90s where we saw drastic demographic shifts, where when we got there, we were less than 5%, we being the Latino or immigrant community, less than 5% of the community. If you fast forward and look at Sanford demographic data now, it's close to, if not more than 25% of the city it identifies as Latino or Hispanic. And so that is a story that's happening across North Carolina, that's happened over the last 20 plus years. And so that sort of demographic shift and how it's impacted communities as we think about what's the future of North Carolina has sort of really painted my experience in our public education system, but also what it's meant to be a first generation college student, growing up in a working class family. And so all of those experiences, I realized that many of them very much were the realities of not just immigrant families, but North Carolinians across the country or across the state that are also living paycheck to paycheck, and sort of the pain of what it feels like to struggle to make ends meet. And so that pain in my experience going to college, to UNC Chapel Hill, why I went to Princeton to study really the root causes of social and racial inequality, and why I decided to move back to North Carolina after that. Part of the reason why I also moved back was because I realized I hated the snow in Princeton, and I realized I was a Southerner at heart as soon as I got there, and I miss my barbecue too. So I keep telling I like friends and family, right? It's like I grew up eating tacos and pupusas and barbecue, right? That's just like what it is, right? That's like North Carolina for me. And so moved back to North Carolina and started doing work in education. And education, I think, is a fascinating lens to see all of the issues that impact North Carolina, because when you work with families, with kids who are about to be first generation college student, and you gain their trust. I do a lot of work around college access. You begin to not just understand some of the challenges in education, but the challenges that low income and working class families face around economic security and opportunity, around what it means to have or not have insurance, what it means to have public transportation, right? Or sort of ways to move around freely in your community, and a number of other issues. And so really has opened my eyes to make sure I use my platform and privilege and all of my experiences and opportunities to continue advocating, not just for the students I work with every day, but for something that I know to be very true, right? Which is the very experience that my family went through and continues to go through here in North Carolina. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. Neighbors on Call has been so instrumental in us being, 4 months away from really being in one of the most competitive elections in North Carolina, and hopefully, in a few months joining Marcia and the General Assembly to make sure we bring change to North Carolina. So I'll pause there. I'm sure we'll continue diving more into my story and some of the things that I'm really passionate about, but I'll toss it back over to you as we sort of navigate this conversation together, Marcia.
So Should we just keep going? I think Ricky and I are going to ask each other some questions.
Yes.
You cut me off. So I was looking at some of the chats. I got to start with a real hardball. I see you've gotten the endorsement of Elizabeth Warren and who else? Lin-Manuel Miranda.
That is both true. That is not fake news. That is absolutely true.
I want a tip. How do I get those endorsements?
Well, you know, the presidential endorsements are still sort of an enigma to me, right? Because her team reached out, and thankfully we've gotten a lot of support through a number of organizations across the state and a few national organizations. And I think the reason why Warren sort of threw her name and endorsement behind mine is they saw the unique nature of my candidacy, right? The race here in Alamance County and sort of the historical significance of having flipping this county from red to blue. The historic nature of we've never had a Latino Democrat ever serve in the General Assembly. And also the reality of this moment, right? Which is like, we need bold solutions for working families across North Carolina. And we need solutions that match the size of the problem. And so I think having that conversation with our team sort of convinced them that this is the sort of change we need in North Carolina, and wanted to make sure that they helped however they could. And so the another enigma, right, is social media, right? Whenever Warren tweets, I guess people listen, right? And so shortly after, he got some support from Lin-Manuel Miranda, which was pretty surreal. And so we'll certainly be reframing that donation.
Well, I think one thing Ricky mentioned, and people don't realize, there's not one minority in the Republican House or Senate. And not to have one Latino in our state House or our state Senate is abominable. Or any African Americans on the other side. And to hear Ricky's story, I mean, stories become very real on the floor when you're debating. And when we're debating the ICE bills, Ricky's story would be personal, and it would be felt, and would be very persuasive. So Ricky, why do you want to do this? What change do you want to see happen?
Yeah, like I said, my lived experiences in North Carolina have really sort of lit a fire under me, and I didn't realize that I really wanted to sort of have my voice amplified until after grad school, when I came back to North Carolina and I started working with some of the students I described, work at UNC now and do a lot of work in education. And most of my work is with high school students trying to get into college. And it was when I actually went to the General Assembly to lobby on behalf of the families I was working with around college affordability issues that I began to sort of notice the reality of the General Assembly, right? Where my stories, I naively thought that my stories could move sort of a vote from yes to no, right, on certain bills just by sitting in a Republican legislature's office, and sort of maybe they just hadn't heard about this issue or sort of this part of the community and their needs, right? And so to sit with my students and myself and tell those stories, and for those stories to maybe not always convince, right, but to not even move people, and to not even really feeling like your voice was not heard, and that it was falling on deaf ears was really frustrating. And so I remember having a few students leave in tears in certain offices because they were, quite frankly, not just not listening, but were pretty rude. And I'd have to think that it had to do because of the issues they were advocating for, and also because of their sort of the color of their skin sometimes, and sort of the borderline and sometimes pretty explicit racist things that were said to some of the students that I work with. And so it was pretty easy from there on out to sort of think about, well, if we want change in North Carolina, the community that I work with have to find their voice in the General Assembly. And so something I often talk about on the campaign trail that I've quoted many times is something that a friend of me in grad school told me, and that was, those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And I realized that no one in the General Assembly really knew what my experience was like growing up in North Carolina, had sort of been in our shoes as a family as we struggled to make ends meet. And we needed more of those community and working sort of class voices in the General Assembly to really inform the decisions we're making. As so many more representatives, due to gerrymandering and a number of other issues, it really seemed that they were disconnected from the communities that were really supposed to be there serving. And so that's really what drives me every day, every week, not just on my campaign, but in work, right? Just sort of making sure that the voiceless have a voice in decision-making tables, and to make sure that people know that representation matters. And I mean that in all sort of ways of using the word, right? Not just racial representation, but around gender, sexual orientation, et cetera, right? We have a really diverse community in North Carolina. And until our elected officials reflect the actual diversity of our communities, I think we aren't on track to really build the North Carolina we want to in the future.
Okay, your turn.
Is it my turn? Okay. You brought this up a little bit in sort of your intro remarks, and I've been actually dying to talk to you about this for weeks now, but wanted to maybe expand a little bit on this work around racial equity in the criminal justice system and the task force that you're serving. I know a lot that is certainly a topic of interest right now, and sort of what the conversations feel like and sound like, and what gives you hope that we're on the right track and pointing the conversation in the right direction right now.
Well, one word I would say is it's been frustrating. I'm on the Judiciary Committee, and I introduced 10 bills this session, all dealing with better equity in our criminal justice system. I mean, if you're arrested in North Carolina on a misdemeanor, like a shoplifting or an assault or trespassing, they can give you a $500 bond and set your court date out for over a month. And if you can't make that bond, you're sitting in a jail cell because of poverty on a misdemeanor. If you're charged with a felony, you have an automatic right within 48 to 72 hours to have a bond hearing. But these low-level offenses, there's no right to an appearance before a judge. So one of my very simple bills was, anyone who cannot make bond is entitled to go before a judge within 48 hours and have a hearing. It's just common sense. They wouldn't let it come out of committee. We introduced a bill to study cash bail. I mean, kind of along the same lines. Never came out of committee. Tried to improve and expand the expunction process, especially for driving offenses that just escalate into bigger and bigger problems. If you don't have the ability to pay and you're put in jail because of poverty, you know, we have to re-examine that, our mass incarceration. We put kids in the juvenile justice system at age 6. No other state has a statute. Your 6-year-old could go into the juvenile justice system. I introduced a bill, let's wait at least until you're 10. Let's get services for kids. Never had a hearing. So I think being naive and from the courts that I thought we could really have good arguments and debates on common sense bills. But the Republican majority, unless they're in favor of it and their caucus, they will stifle everything and not let bills come out for hearings. I think that's the hardest thing that I've been exposed to and I'm learning about, and why taking the majority will change everything. We stop bad things from happening, but getting good progressive issues coming forward, even up or down vote. But let's have a discussion. So that's kind of my long answer to your question.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and I sort of have worked so much on the other side of that, right? Which is really the root cause of poverty and its impacts, right? And so I think you describing what you described, right? How we are criminalizing poverty, right? Is just heartbreaking. I'm so glad that you're already there, and I'm excited to join you to sort of make some progress on that issue next year.
I think the other thing I really love about and meeting and talking to Ricky, but his background is on the board of directors of NC Child. and all he's done in his community in Alamance to helping kids. I mean, I think that's my motivation. I'm amazed at how few representatives really put at the top of their priorities, how do we make North Carolina better for our children educationally and opportunities. So you want to talk about your work with NC Child at all?
Yeah, of course. It's one of my joys over the last few years, but also a bit sad, right? Because they are a statewide advocacy organization that consistently lobbies in the General Assembly. I had to step down from the board of directors this year as I ran for office, right? But certainly I'm excited that we'll have them as a partner in making sure that we are doing all we can for kids. My motivation for joining NC Child is I work with young people in middle school and high school. I'm not working a ton on early childhood education, but I also recognize how critical that is for really setting up kids and families for success in the future. And I don't really think about issues in silos because we know that the health of a kid, a child, certainly impacts their well-being and their success in school. And so making sure that I was thinking about both issues sort of intertwined was really important to me. And so serving on NC Child's board gave me that opportunity to really think about how are we advancing the health and well-being of children and families across North Carolina? And how are we thinking about this issue in a more holistic way? And so we often think about physical health and sort of what does it mean for children to have, a good, healthy diet and sort of an environment in which they can thrive. But we don't often think about sort of mental health issues or really the toxic stress that might be present in their environment that may prevent them from exceeding. And that's something that I'm particularly passionate about because it's something that I've seen firsthand, right? And growing up, really connecting the dots for myself and my siblings and friends in my community, right? In terms of what does it look like when working families are struggling to make ends meet, right? Like it's not just about the economic impact of that challenge. It's also around the stress that parents feel and the stress they may pass on to their children. And what does that do around their educational outcomes? And so really thinking about those issues together is really important for me as we think about how do we make sure we're setting up our kids to succeed. And so it's often around the not just what we're doing in the classroom, but also the supplemental support systems like nurses, counselors, social workers in a school building that really allow our children to really be set up for success. And so yeah, I mean, they work on a number of different issues, but I was excited to be the vice chair of the board for about a year and as a at-large board member for a few years prior to that to make sure we're advancing that conversation in North Carolina.
That's fabulous.
Yeah. So go ahead.
A follow-up and just a quick one, especially with COVID and how it's, impacting so hard the Latino community. Anything you're working on or you would encourage us to be aware of?
Yeah, no, that is a really good question. I mean, so many of these challenges are structural in nature, right? And they are impacting not just the Latino community, but other communities of color and low-income communities. One of my biggest concerns is how many Latino families are part of immigrant families whose documentation status many live in mixed status families, you can call them, right? And so children who are heading to school, they may have not received any relief from the federal government. And so really in a position where they were unemployed and not have a lot of financial security behind them to really navigate the storm. And so locally, what that has looked like is really the nonprofit and philanthropic sector stepping up to make sure that there was food distributions, to make sure that folks had a place to turn to for help when they needed it. And so that is my biggest concern right now is like, do people literally have food on the table? We get calls, by we, I mean my wife and I, because my wife works at the local hospital and has been a huge advocate in the community for so long across North Carolina. And so much of her work has been connecting people to resources. And we receive calls on a nightly basis around folks who have lost their jobs or still struggling with unemployment. Folks who now we're seeing more and more where we used to just hear stories of people getting sick, like maybe, a few counties away or you see it on the news. Now it's friends and family getting sick. And so it's become a very hard-hitting reality in Alamance County, where every other person, it feels like at this point, has gotten COVID, and they are struggling to sort of with the uncertainty of what all that means. And so we know that a lot of that had to do with, or at least my theory, right? And I think there's plenty of evidence to sort of back this up, that many in the Latino community work in these essential industries that never stopped, and they never stopped working, right? And so we're talking about poultry plants and tortilla plants. Those are the types of places that my mom worked at when I grew up, and so I sort of know how grueling they are, and at times not always thinking about the needs and safety of their workers as a priority, right? I remember my mom would come home and her hands would be just so cold, and I would just like rub them because they to sort of soften them up, because she'd essentially work in an ice box all day, right? And so I know the conditions are suboptimal at best, and also often crowded in some locations without a lot of PPE. And so making sure that employers are doing the right thing to make sure that they're protecting their workers is something that I've been looking into in terms of who's doing a good job and who sort of can step it up to make sure that our farm workers, folks in poultry plants and other locations where we do see a large number in construction as well, and restaurants, right, where we do see a large proportion of our Latino neighbors working, to make sure that they are doing their part to make sure that we can navigate the storm together. Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna transition us a little bit from issues, because I'm also curious. These are questions I always have for our current representatives that I figured I'd wait a few months to ask. But since you're here, just do you have any advice, important things for first year representatives, right? As we take back the majority and I'm heading to Raleigh, do you have any advice for folks as they transition into this new role of being a representative?
A lot is about relationships and getting to know your colleagues on the same side of the aisle. It's hard to get to know others on the opposite side of the aisle, but you will eventually find common threads or issues. I have not been good enough to go really, I take pretty hard stands on controversial issues. I'm a big gun safety advocate. And that is not well received by much of the leadership on the Republican side, but I'm not going to back down. The longer I've been there, it's easier to start to get to know people until this COVID thing came up. But I think relationships are important. Following your values. Many times we have caucus meetings before a vote, and it will come up, well, if you're in an unsafe district, you might want to vote, with the majority. But if you're in a safe district, feel free. And that rubs me wrong. I mean, I'm there because of values. And I take my votes because these are the values which I feel I was elected to hold. Those are some of the issues that come up that you just, with time, learn about. There is no schedule. We're at the total whim and control of whenever the Republicans want to call us into session, and wait for hours until they want to come out of their caucus. It's hard to plan for your life or your work or your vacation, because it's like being a firefighter and the bell suddenly rings. But that's kind of what we sign up for. That you always are aware the proudest title you can have is representing someone else and being their voice. But I can tell, Ricky, you have that personality, the care and compassion for others, that it's not an ego trip. It's really doing what you can for those that aren't sitting there, but you are their voice. I think you'll love it.
Looking forward to it.
So what, if you were there in January when we began and you're ready to file 2 or 3 bills, what would you like, sky's the limit, that you would like to file and say, I want to push this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let's make some assumptions that we got like the low hanging fruit out of the way, right? Like Medicaid expansion, automatic voter registration, sort of voting rights stuff, and like, we do that in the first day, right? And so we move on, right, to some of the meatier things that require a lot more thought and planning. I've been working on a commission, a statewide commission called My Future NC, which is really thought about how do we reach a college attainment goal for the state that will allow us to fulfill the jobs of the future. And so the commission has stated that through they did some forecasting, some economic forecasting. Is actually the same group, I believe, the West End group that did the Leandro case report around sort of recommendations on how to move forward with that. But essentially, they've said that we're going to have about 500,000 jobs that will go unfulfilled in about 10 years in 2030 if we don't do something about our how we credential, post-secondary credentials for young people and really build a robust workforce development strategy. So essentially, right, that's issues around college affordability, that's issues of college access and success. That's a number of issues. And so I'm excited to dig into that, especially around how we make sure we narrow that achievement gap and make sure that Black and Latino students are succeeding at the same rate as their white counterparts. And so on some of the other work that I've been working on that I'm excited to dig in with some legislation is around teacher diversity as well. Teacher diversity is not just a cosmetic fix, right, to our K-12 system. It is also sort of evidence-based around when students have teachers that look like them and have similar lived experiences, they actually perform better in the classroom. So thinking about how do we diversify sort of staff, personnel, and administration in our schools to make sure that we are setting up our students for success is something that I'm excited to tackle when I'm at the General Assembly. We've seen that young Black students as early as in elementary school with one Black teacher can see their graduation rates soar, and also sort of their college access prospect or their college prospects also increase. And that's just one Black teacher. If you double that, right, you sort of get sort of a double of the effect. And so that's just one example, right, of thinking around how do you really think about equity in our policymaking process, and also bring in the community in that process as well to make sure that they have ownership over those issues and they are excited about tackling those challenges on the ground as well. So those are just a few of the things that I'm excited to tackle once I'm in the General Assembly. The list is long, but that's just, the beginning of it.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wondering, I'm still sort of thinking about, my future here. So thinking about, you've named some of the challenges and also sort of the realities of the General Assembly, but I'm sure there's also been some lighthearted moments in the General Assembly, and as well as sort of you talked about relationships being so important in sort of legislating and also just building that community in the General Assembly. What's been some of your better memories in the General Assembly? Do you have some fond memories with colleagues that you enjoyed while you've been there for the last few years?
None that I would ever admit to. No, I am very impressed how dedicated and hard people work on both sides. I think for the most part, people are there because of their values. And, it's, you don't want ego to get in the way. I think to always stay in touch, one of the most gratifying things is to be in touch with constituents. We have done so many unemployment benefit claims to try and help people navigate the system right now. And just to hear back that it's worked out or doing things like that, I think give a whole lot of meaning to it. I can't say it's been really fun. The worst day was September 11th. As you all know, we were told there would be no vote, no budget, veto override, and we were suddenly shocked and aware that only 9 members of the Democrats were on the floor, and they called the vote. And Deb Butler, had the presence of mind to protest, to say we will not yield. And I think that became a rallying cry. We are tired of the abuse of process. When we go in, the first thing we do in the new session will be making the rules. And we need to do what's right. We don't need to retaliate. We don't need floaters, Republican floaters coming into committees and voting to get their way in committees. I think it's always a changing dynamic. You will be pleased that many of the people you meet, we're excited to have you here. And just kind of finishing up, you know, how do you campaign in this time? I mean, I'm struggling with staying in touch with people. You want to raise money, we want to help you. And how are you doing it? How are you getting out to people? What would you like us to do?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That has been the question that has not gotten old in COVID, because it seems like things change every day and every week. I will say that without an incredible team, like, I mean, Elaine and the campaign staff and Neighbors on Call, right? I don't know what I mean, this is not hyperbole. I know this is a Neighbors on Call event, but really, that I would be lost. It would be a very different experience, right? Because I am very much an extrovert, and I get my energy from talking to voters and the house parties that we're having, our canvases, right? Oh, we can reminisce already, right? Our canvases were so energy filled, and it really sort of was what kicked off every week, because that would give us the energy to keep going every week. And so without that, right, I really did struggle the first few weeks in March and April. April was tough for everyone, right? It just with the uncertainty in the air with COVID, we've adjusted some, but just really also just being stuck in your house, right? And how do you campaign? And so it was definitely one of the lower points in the campaign and at work. But thankfully, Neighbors on Call didn't skip a beat, and we were on a Zoom call pretty quickly, right? With game plan B, which was phone calling. You know, I don't even know what number we're at, Elaine, but we're at like 25,000 people or something. I don't know, that we've called over the last few months. And so seeing folks on here has really been energizing, and to see how hard everyone else is working. I'm certainly, you know, they're keeping me accountable as well, right? Like, we are all sort of working our tails off to make sure we have no regrets in November. And also, there's also little things that keep you going. My wife, many of you have met her, a lot of you haven't. And the reason you haven't is because she's been so busy serving the community. And so in many ways, on days that I'm tired and maybe you don't want to do that call time, or you don't want to do that extra phone call to continue phone banking, I noticed that, you know, my wife isn't home, or that she's still on the phone, sort of serving someone in her community. And so certainly can't have her outworking me, right? I'm the one running for office. So sort of making sure that, you know, we're keeping our eyes on the prize. But jokes aside, in terms of just like the busyness of it all, I think the need is really what keeps me going. I think that these phone calls have been everything, because it is a direct line to someone else's life. And to hear someone, just a few days ago, I told the story on our phone bank, if y'all were on there on Monday, but someone was a second time caller calling me because one of y'all called them a few months ago. We were able to make sure that we got groceries to them, and we got them gift cards and a bunch of stuff to make sure that they were waiting this sort of, you know, unemployment wave. And he called me back and said, I thought about calling you back for days now. Things were going all right, and I got my job, you know, my hours back at work, but, you know, they were cut back again because things are getting so bad again. And so I know there's other people hurting out there too. I didn't want to ask for help twice, but I need help, you know? And so to be able to be in a position to help this person, but also thinking about folks are really hurting out there right now, and to make sure that, you know, at the end of the day, I am, you know, still employed, have the privilege of campaigning, and to fight to serve these folks, right? You know, who am I to not be working, you know, harder to make sure that we can make things better for everyone here in North Carolina. And so I think it's these stories, right, that have always fueled me, and things that I sort of keep in my back pocket as I think about what's really happening in North Carolina and why we do what we do. And so yeah, so that is COVID in a nutshell right now. But I'm excited to kind of keep pushing forward with our phone banks. And, you know, we started this, it's almost, I keep saying this because I've been counting down, but it's almost literally a year ago that we started this campaign, and many of you were there when we launched. And so, you know, it's the time is now, right? We are less than 4 months away. And so excited to end these 4 months completely exhausted because we did everything we could to win this and see how the chips fall in November. But thank y'all so much for everything y'all have done. It's really meant a ton, and not something that I anticipated on the campaign trail, which is the friendships and the relationships that you would build that would make this all worth it regardless of the outcome. And so, yeah, really appreciate everything that y'all been doing for us.
That's a perfect time to segue to tell you all the opportunities that we have to phone bank for candidates. So let's take a minute to do that, and then we'll save a few minutes at the end for the audience questions too. And there are many audience questions. So we have lots of opportunities to contact voters in Ricky's district and the other districts that we are fighting for. Sunday at 2 o'clock with Nicole Quick's campaign, Thursday the 23rd with Nicole Quick's campaign, Saturday the 25th with Sydney Batch's campaign, Monday another one, Monday the 27th another one with Ricky, and that's through the county to county campaign, and Thursday the 30th with Terrence Everett's campaign. You can sign up for all of these at neighborsoncall.org. Please do that. We can't wait to work with you.
Now, because we know that some folks feel uncomfortable, and that's easy to understand with phone banking, we provide supports to help you out. Even though you can do this alone from home, you'll actually be online with the campaign crew and other not callers, so you won't feel alone. This is how it works. We send you a script and information about the candidate in advance. Now then, the phone bank itself starts with a training Zoom, and often the candidate is there so you can hear them speak. Then you make your calls. In parallel, during the phone bank, you can chat online with other callers, which is helpful, and there'll be people there who can answer your questions. And by the way, we aren't trying to persuade any voters, just turn out other like-minded folks like us and get them to the polls. At the end, finally, everyone meets up again to debrief in a Zoom, and that's how it works. Okay, now back in June, we held a training session, which we called Overcoming Phone Bank Fear and Loathing. And I must say it was well received. If you missed it, we invite you to watch the recording of it to help you get started. I promise it will help. You can find it on our website under resources. And next, we have another event like this coming up in July. July 29th, when Greg Meyer will help us get to know candidate Nicole Quick of Guilford, much as we had tonight. We hope you all will join us. Please RSVP. Now, Patience and Bonnie, what's going on in the chat?
Okay, we're going to have to go back a ways. Ricky, Kathy wants to know your perspective on concerns that keep some Latinx voters from voting. And do you feel that your candidacy is going to inspire some voters who might not otherwise have voted to get out to vote this year?
Oh, let's unmute Mickey.
Sanji, yeah.
Yeah, unmute. Yeah, so that is a nut we're certainly trying to crack. I think from anecdotal evidence and just our experience on the ground and talking to my mom, I think part of it is certainly this is a really new experience for people. For some of us, we grew up going to the polls, right? You know, mom and dad sort of taking you to vote or things of that nature, right? For my mom, the first time she voted was in 2016. And that's because she was a legal resident, but never sort of made that jump to become a citizen because of financial barriers and also sort of just like challenges of identity, right? Like, what does it mean to fully leave your country and then become American, right? That she would always say, her and my dad, that, you know, they didn't necessarily feel American, right? Because like, are we truly welcomed in this country at times, right? So, you know, that's a whole different story there around sort of an immigrant sort of challenge and integrating into America. But in 2016, she made sort of the decision to be a part of this election. And part of her challenge was intimidation at the polls. Not necessarily real, certainly that was true at some points, but also perceived. with so much racial animosity around the 2016 election and in other elections, she has always been afraid to sort of be fully present and vocal, or not vocal, right, but just be present at the polls. And so she's never gone to vote without me there. And so I share that story because I've heard that story a lot, actually, that people are actually intimidated to go physically vote at the polls because of what might happen, things they've seen on social media, right? They don't want people yelling at them or intimidating them. And so thinking about making sure that people have that support and making this a much more social sort of endeavor, I think is really important for the Latino community. I also heard, I was at the very beginning of this campaign last year, I went and was visiting small businesses, and there was a young woman and her mom at a salon that they own, and they were talking to me about elections here in the U.S. and they said it's so different here in the U.S. and they're from El Salvador as well, and they said in El Salvador, everyone has, it's almost like a holiday. People go out in trucks and buses together. It's a celebration, right? You do like a parade to the polls. It's like a thing that people are really into. Here, no one talks about it. It's all secretive, and the environment is just different. And so I think that changing some of those behaviors and creating that community to sort of allow people to be a part of it, I think is really important. I think some of the other structural barriers are the same we see for a lot of folks, right? Is around sort of voter IDs and some of the more structural challenges around access to the polls that I think we need to make it easier. I'm hopeful that this online voter registration feature now that is available to people will hopefully motivate young people, especially young Latinos, which is like the majority of the Latino vote, right, is younger voters, to register to vote and help their friends register to vote. We've heard in the last few weeks, I've been getting a lot of messages on social media and just phone calls as well to talk about being involved in our elections because they've been moved by everything that's been happening in our country around racial tension and racial inequality in America. And so it's actually been a fascinating thing to see that in the first 10 months of our campaign, we were really targeting voters, right, and reaching out to them. In the last few weeks, people have been reaching out to us, just like, how can we help? How can we be involved? And folks that I haven't met, they've been seeking me out. And so I'm excited that I'm hopeful that my candidacy does inspire folks, not just to get involved in the election, but also to run for office themselves, and not just in Alamance County, but across the state. And so I'm hoping that this election is the one domino that falls that allows folks to feel like they can also be a part of this democracy.
Okay, well, Representative Morey, what keeps the Republicans so stuck against these fairly obvious reforms to the criminal justice system that you're trying to get passed?
What keeps them so stuck? Probably because a Democrat proposed it. In fact, the Koch brothers are putting millions of dollars into criminal justice reform. There's Duke has a new center for science and criminal justice that's mainly being sponsored by the Koch brothers. So I think there is bipartisan. I think a lot of Republicans are seeing the cost of mass incarceration and what it does to our economy. Even though they may have a different motivation, I think the movement is starting to build up, and we will be seeing some good bipartisan reform.
Ricky, what is your view on the Graham Black Lives Matter protests and what needs to happen to address racial equality there in your county?
Yeah, I was out at the most recent rally over the weekend, and that was, unlike anything anyone has ever seen around here. We had, I think, close to 1,000, if not more, people in downtown Graham, really wanting to be heard and for folks to listen around why, folks are marching, right? And so I think it really begins with the community having their voice heard. And so much we try to really squash this conversation and not really promote this dialogue around what does it actually look like for communities to heal. We've seen, this process happen in other countries, right? Germany, South Africa, around like a truth and reconciliation sort of conversation, right? And dialogue around what does racial healing look like in our communities. And we, for some reason, so many of our communities have refused to want to have that conversation. And so I'm optimistic that so many Black leaders in our community are finding their voice and courage to really lead us in the right direction. And so I have been listening to a lot of the young activists in our community to think about what does change actually look like in our communities? What does it look like for us to really achieve equity? And I think that does begin with several of the criminal justice reforms that Marcia was talking about, and really thinking about what is, many of their demands have been around police accountability. So thinking about, how do we create a transparent and accountable police force that allows folks to feel, for everyone in our community to feel safe. And so those are the sorts of conversations we've been having locally, and it's actually led to a lot of really great advocacy and dialogue that I hope continues even beyond the election.
Shri says, Marcia and Ricky, it seems that in order to have our voice heard, we're going to have to take the majority in the House. Otherwise, all of our ideas and dreams will remain just that. Marcia, I really admire your perseverance, being in the minority in the House. How do you keep going?
It's my job. We have to be there. I'm very optimistic. I think the way Trump is imploding and setting this country on fire, people are going to come out and vote. I think it's going to trickle down in North Carolina. I think we're going to flip this House, this Senate, because of the candidates like Ricky. So I'm excited. And I'm there for you all. You all motivate me. So thank you.
Okay, and we're getting to the end here, and I just wanted to say there are a lot of questions and comments in the chat about phone banking, about discomfort with phone banking, but there are offers from various people to serve as phone banking buddies and to support people. And I will speak from experience to say that I don't like phone banking, but I do it, and I think it's really important, and Neighbors on Call provides just really great support to make you feel like you're part of a community when you're doing it. So you don't feel alone when you're doing it. So Bonnie, is there any question that I overlooked that we should make our final question?
Well, Mark had a question about how can we all contribute to maximizing turnout in the midst of a pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways, Neighbors on Call have given us some of those tools to make sure we are talking to people. We know that canvassing was one of the most effective tools we had in building relationships, right? And phone calls is our next best strategy at this moment. I've had some really great conversations. And the voicemails that you're leaving are actually really matter. Today I had a college student who called me back because a volunteer called on my behalf and said, they gave me your phone number and said that I could chat with you if I had any issues to talk about. Well, I have issues to talk about. And so we chatted for about 30 minutes around, he's currently a student at UNCW, really concerned about reopening of universities and what that means, and also really concerned around police accountability issues. And so wanted to talk about both of those issues, and was quite frankly shocked that I picked up and said, "Hi, this is Ricky," and said, "Oh, wow, I didn't think this was actually your number." And so the fact that your interactions with these voters actually led to that. The end of the call, he said, "Well, I'm definitely voting for you. Let me know what I can do to help." And so, it's one voter at a time, and making sure that we're having these conversations, because that one voter turns into 1, 2, 3 voters because they're telling their friends, and it's really about building that community of support locally. And so, yeah, that's my pitch, to support us through Neighbors on Call with phone banking if you can now, and join us for these next 4 months, which I'm sure will be unforgettable.
I would just add, every time you talk to people, tell them to get their absentee ballots. Write in, get them, fill out the census, get in these absentee ballots, fill them out. Let's help people have a witness. I think we're going to go up to almost 40–50% of mail-in absentee ballots, and we got to be prepared for that. So anyway, thank you all very much.
Thank you both so much. And I'll add my 2 cents on to what you just said, Representative Morey, which is I just did my request, and that helped me a lot when I was on the phone for Ricky on Monday night, because then when I was following the script to say, here's how you can get your absentee ballot. I was speaking from personal experience. It was great. So I second that. I just trying to sum up what's in the chat. There is so much gratitude for both of you. We can't even put into words how grateful we are for what you do for us, both of you. And Ricky, we really want to see you get elected. So everyone, please remember to sign up for a phone bank at neighborsoncall.org. Join us again on July 29 to get to know Nicole Quick with the help of Representative Greg Meyer and Representative Morey. Ricky, thank you so, so much. Good night, everybody.
Yes, I would like to say too that I'm just moved so much by the two of you. You're just absolutely terrific. We couldn't do what we do if we weren't truly in love with both of you, and we are. So thank you so much. I'm gonna cry now. I'm the sentimental fool in the group. And someday, Marcia, I want you to tell us about your desk. Well, thank you. Nobody wants to leave. It's too good.
Good night, y'all. Thank y'all so much.
Night.
Thank you.